I now request Professor Neena Modi and Dr. Hariram to please come on stage to discuss strategies to prevent extrauterine growth restriction. It's my pleasure to introduce Professor Neena Modi, who is a professor of neonatal medicine at Imperial College London, and a consultant in neonatal medicine at Chelsea and Westminster Hospital, London. She is an academic lead of a multidisciplinary neonatal research group addressing early life growth and nutritional determinants of long-term health. She also leads a neonatal data analysis unit that integrates the use of clinical electronic data for research and health services support. She is currently the elected president of Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health. I welcome Dr. Neena. Hariram is a dedicated neonatologist currently based at Sagar Hospital, Bangalore. He organizes the annual Hippocrate Conference, which is a prestigious event in the field of neonatology. He attends all major conferences all around the world to keep himself updated. He is definitely an inspiration for all of us.
Thank you very much indeed, and it's a great pleasure indeed to have been here. I've spent a very interesting day listening to the speakers and the discussion. It's clearly a very good audience. Now, the brief that I've been given around the world and discuss what we do in the London neonatal unit and what you do in neonatal units here, and actually reflect upon the fact that the principles of what we're trying to do are exactly the same regardless of where in the world we actually are. So I would like to start off. I'd like to take you through 3 case histories. Very, very common case histories, indeed the sort of things that you will see in a neonatal unit anywhere in the world, any moment of the day. And let's just talk through the principles of how we are going to deal with the nutritional management of babies who we see in neonatal units. And so this is the first case history that I'd like to discuss, the first of 3. But I'd like this really to be your session, not my session. I'm not going to talk here for 3/4 of an hour. But I'm going to ask you to tell me how you would manage a baby born at 27 weeks gestation, weighing 960 grams. You'll see the maternal history there, a healthy mother, no obvious reason for her going into preterm labour, and she had a full, complete course of antenatal steroids. The baby was mercifully born vaginally, in very good condition, and required ventilation for 36 hours, and then was extubated onto nasal CPAP. We've talked about ventilation support, we've talked about infection control, but let's talk about what you would do to develop and implement a nutritional management plan. So I'd like some comments from the floor, please, about what you would do going back right to the very beginning. And I'm not going to say what I mean by the very beginning. I'd like some comments from the floor, please, gentlemen at the back.
Start the protein feeds early, as soon as possible.
Can I ask you to go even further back?
Yeah. Encourage, talk to, if you get an opportunity, you can talk to mother about expressing breast milk, even before the delivery, that is there, and take confidence and encourage her to express breast milk as soon as possible. And given a chance, there is no absolute contraindications for starting trophic feeds, even if the baby has umbilical lines for anti-growth. Of course, there may be challenges.
Right now the baby's gone into the neonatal unit, so can I ask you to slow down a little bit? You've talked to the mum antenatally, the baby's now been born.
Yeah.
Then what happens?
You get the steam involved to help mother to express milk. So, and get the express breast milk within a few hours.
Express breast milk within a few hours. How many of you in the audience have expressed breast milk? It's rather difficult to express milk within a few hours, I think, but otherwise I have absolutely agreement with what you say.
It's a challenge.
It is a challenge. It is a challenge. And so I think you're absolutely right that we would all agree that we would want to give this baby mother's milk as soon as possible. But we've also heard at this conference today the importance of giving the baby colostrum. And it's a question of how often do we actually do that, And when it comes to quality improvement issues, are we actually monitoring the extent to which we use colostrum in a baby such as this? Colostrum is probably, it's been emphasized before and I'm going to emphasize it again. Colostrum may be considered nutrition, but it's not nutrition. It's actually an anti-infective strategy. It's also an immunological strategy. And if somebody gave us a magic bullet or a new product off our shelves and said, you know, let's pay a large amount of money for this amazing liquid, we would do that regularly. But we don't really give as much credibility as we should do to colostrum. So how many of you actually administer colostrum to a baby within the first couple of hours of the baby being born? Anyone? No, why not? I mean, this is the issue. Now, this is what we do try and do. We do try and administer colostrum immediately. And by immediately, I mean immediately. So when the baby is admitted to a neonatal unit and people are busy putting lines in, sorting out ventilation and so on and so forth, we will be trying to get our nurses to speak to that mother and obtain a few drops of colostrum. There's also been discussion, which you may have heard of in the literature, about people obtaining colostrum when possible in advance of a baby being born. Now that remains an untested, untried procedure. It's primarily being promoted on a very non-evidence-based justification for babies that are born to diabetic mothers. But it's something that is worth considering, because very often if a mother is in an antenatal ward for a period of time, she will be producing a few drops of colostrum, and you might even be able to get colostrum before she actually delivers. Be that as it may, you should certainly be able to get colostrum within a few drops of colostrum within a few hours of birth. And one of the things that I heard, a very, very innovative suggestion that I heard of just a couple of days ago, was the production of colostrum packs for mothers. So the nursing staff in a neonatal unit will make up little packs, little plastic pouches, in which they will put 8 to 10 2.5 ml syringes, and a couple of wipes, and an information leaflet about the importance of colostrum. And a neonatal nurse or a midwife will go to the mother as soon as she's delivered or immediately before she's going to be delivered and say, this is what you can do for your baby. You can fill these medicine syringes, these 2.5 ml medicine syringes with colostrum, which is the most important anti-infective immunological product that we have available to us. It beats any single expensive medication that you can buy anywhere, and this is what you as a mother can do for your baby. Now the idea of the packs was produced having had discussions with mothers, and many, many mothers, as you know, in fact the majority of mothers, you will know if you've spoken to them, will tell you how they feel extremely guilty when they give birth to a premature baby. And they look for something to do. They feel guilty because they feel it's their fault, even though it isn't their fault. But they feel guilty about having delivered a premature baby. And they feel bereft because they feel they're incapable of doing anything for their baby. But they say that just filling these 2.5 ml syringes with colostrum gives them a sense of empowerment and actually doing something important for their baby. So I would put a lot of emphasis on actually providing colostrum within the first few hours of birth. Would anyone like to discuss why I'm emphasizing the first few hours of birth? Sorry? Absolutely, colonization. Now, many mothers come into in threatened preterm labour and will be present in a really quite unpleasant hospital environment. Somebody said a moment ago, and the audience laughed, but it's very, very true, that in fact the risk of nasty bacterial infection is far greater within hospital than it is from outside hospital. So many of these mothers who are about to deliver preterm will have become colonized themselves with hospital-acquired organisms. And as soon as a baby is born, a baby is at risk of being colonized with some really very nasty hospital-acquired organisms. I'm told by my friends here in India that you have quite a high gram-negative colonization rate in your neonatal units. Well, it begs the question, doesn't it, that you really don't want a preterm baby to be colonized with gram-negative organisms, and what you really want to do is for this baby to be colonized with healthy organisms acquired from the mother and to be given colostrum very, very early on. Colostrum, as has also always been said today, is and breast milk is a live substance. It contains probiotic species. And so what you want the mother to do is hug her baby, kiss her baby. No one's mentioned kissing. Kiss her baby and provide some colostrum for her baby. And please don't underestimate the power of these very simple, zero-cost interventions. So hugging, kissing and colostrum, very good things for colonizing a baby with benign bacteria. Let's move on then. So now, before we move away from colostrum though, I presume you do give colostrum to your babies. Would anyone like to comment on how you give colostrum to your babies? Are there any views here? Yes, a buccal sweep.
Yeah, we do the buccal sweep initially, but not within 2 hours, because when we get it, it's maybe about 6 or 7 hours.
Yeah, well, you're doing well, but try and do even better, I think.
We would start trophic feed soon as possible on day 1.
But any other methods of administering colostrum? Because there's well, not so much controversy, but debate about the best method of administering colostrum. So buccal sweep is certainly being used. Oropharyngeal colostrum is being advocated. And of course, you can also give colostrum down a nasogastric tube. The debate is about whether or not the contact of colostrum with the pharyngeal lymphoid tissue is actually an immunological enhancing mechanism. There is no hard data for that at the moment, but that's what the debate ranges around. And certainly I see no reason, it appears to be no reason, why you should not be giving oropharyngeal colostrum. It's going to be a very tiny volume anyway. So let's go on then. Babies now in the neonatal units, hopefully has had some colostrum. Some of you would have considered giving probiotics. And the jury, as you know, is very definitely still unresolved and still out in the use of probiotics. I would say that if you do choose to use probiotics, please don't use probiotics unless you've used colostrum as well, because to do the latter without doing the former doesn't make any sense at all. And if you're uncertain as to whether or not to use probiotics, don't use probiotics because the evidence is not secure, but please do use colostrum because that, as I say, is a cheap, very, very simple intervention indeed. It's ironic, isn't it, how human beings prefer the expensive interventions to the cheap interventions. But the reason the jury is out in relation to probiotics is because although I think there have been 24 randomized controlled trials done of probiotic use to date, but the largest trial, which is the UK PIP study, which has not yet been published, but which has been reported on, the largest trial to date of probiotics, this was Bifidobacterium brevi, showed absolutely no impact on reduction in sepsis or necrotizing enterocolitis whatsoever. So the use of probiotics is not standard of care in the UK and is very unlikely to become standard of care in the foreseeable future. So that's one reason why we do not use probiotics, or we do not consider probiotics as standard of care. The other issues that remain unresolved as far as probiotics are concerned is that, and I'll say more about this tomorrow, is that of course not one of the 24 trials done to date has actually included in their trial methodology a need for long-term follow-up to address the impact of colonizing a very preterm baby's gastrointestinal tract with a uniform microbial flora. Now, this is an extremely rich area of research, as you will know. The literature is absolutely jam-packed full of publications about the importance of the human microbiome to health. But we really do not know. As a neonatal community, we've still not done the science, and we still don't know what the impact of providing high doses of a single bacteria to a newborn baby might be. What we do know from basic science research largely in adult age groups and in animal models is that, of course, manipulating the human microbiome may have profound consequences in two aspects. First of all, in the way in which your immunological abilities mature and develop, and the second is the way in which you harvest energy. In other words, the ability of bacteria in your bowel to actually promote the extraction of energy from foodstuffs, and the manipulation of the human microbiome is believed to be one of the problems leading that has led to the epidemic of obesity worldwide. And in particular, and I'm not sure whether there'll be time for this, but there are some very, very interesting data, some of which has been put together by my own research group, showing the adverse impact of delivery by caesarean section, elective caesarean section, where a baby has not been exposed to a maternal vaginal microbiome. So manipulating the preterm baby and even the newborn baby's microbiome may have profound consequences. And as a neonatal scientific community, we really do have a responsibility to follow up babies in a methodological way if we are going to be using probiotics. So I would say to those of you who are using probiotics, please establish a probiotic register and make sure that you follow up these babies long term, if at all possible, in order to study the science of how a newborn baby's immunological development takes place and whether or not changing the microbiome is going to have an impact on their energy metabolism in the years to come. But to do anything else, I think, is irresponsible at this stage. So that's my probiotic story. Let's go on then. The baby's in the neonatal unit. We're going to try and get maternal breast milk. What else would you be doing?
TPN.
TPN. Now, do you mean, who said TPN? Lots of people said TPN. Do you mean TPN or PN? PN. And when you say PN, what do you mean? Do you mean amino acids, glucose, lipids? All three? All three? Okay. Sorry? All three. Now, does it have to be all three?
Protein and sugar is the most important.
That's right, that's right. And again, we don't know, I think, is the honest answer, whether it should be all three. There's certainly good theoretical reason to suggest that amino acids and glucose may well be sufficient, particularly if you are giving this baby breast milk as well. So it's another area that is completely uncertain at the moment. Certainly by giving lipids, you can increase the energy delivery quite substantially, obviously. You're going to be giving 9 kilocalories per gram of lipid. But do we really want to be giving so much energy? Because the exact energy requirements for a preterm baby are also not established. So this is another very, very rich area that requires careful study, which I recommend to you if you have uncertainty about it. Now, it becomes progressively more difficult to do certain studies as they become embedded in practice. For those of you who are not yet using an established protocol for parenteral nutrition, I would recommend to you that you should trial the giving of lipids, amino acids, and glucose in comparison to amino acids and glucose in conjunction with breast milk feeds. Because this is potentially a hugely important advance in newborn care, and nobody knows the answer to this anywhere in the world. So reflect upon that. Any other comments about the nature of PN that you would use? How much would you give? Let's talk about quantities.
Protein.
Sorry, 3 grams of?
3 grams of protein.
Yes, 3 grams of amino acids we've got. Is that a general consensus?
3 to 3.5.
3 to start with, 3 to 3.5? Any advance? Start small? Or start as you mean to go on? Start at the dose the final dose you're aiming to give, or start low and go up incrementally? What do you do?
Protein 3 to 3.5, then increase to 4.
Okay, 3 to 3.5 starting and then go to 4. Okay, would you all start at 3 to 3.5? Okay, well that's very interesting. Now, the debate about how much protein to give has been completely predicated upon theory as opposed to evidence. And the theoretical basis for advocating a certain protein intake is based upon trying to achieve the intrauterine growth rate. And that is a potentially dangerous thing to do. We do not know what the appropriate growth rate for a preterm baby should be. The vast majority of our preterm babies are actually growth restricted. You have an obesity epidemic in India, just as we have in the UK, and indeed every single country around the world has got. We know from about 6 decades of research that accelerated growth is a hugely, hugely dangerous risk factor for the metabolic syndrome. And yet here we are promoting accelerated growth in our preterm babies. So a note of caution here, we do not know what the right growth rate is for a preterm baby, and to suggest that it should be the same as the intrauterine growth rate, or even worse, which is what one sees promoted, is that a preterm baby should catch up to the growth parameters of a full-term baby, is perhaps being a little bit naive, and perhaps we should be questioning what the optimum growth rate of a preterm baby should be. So that's one issue that remains unresolved. We do not know how quickly is the optimum growth rate for a preterm baby. The second uncertainty lies around to come back to the issue of protein intakes. The protein intakes that you see quoted in the literature and in all the consensus guidelines, which I have to tell you are based upon grade D evidence, are based on this theoretical basis of mimicking the intrauterine growth trajectory, which is as yet unproven. But we've just completed a trial in which we compared the incremental delivery of amino acids starting at 2.7 grams per kilo per day and then going up in a stepwise manner to giving the immediate recommended daily intake of 3.5 grams per kilo per day. And this has only just been submitted for publication. The results have not been presented or published anywhere. So you're not quite the first, but you're certainly the first international group to hear these results. And what we found was, first of all, that we had a very strict enteral policy to accompany this, by the way. So the babies would start on milk feeds on day 1 and would go up in a very protocolized manner. But what we found was that the babies who received the higher protein intake actually had a higher incidence of higher blood ureas. They had a slightly smaller head circumference. That was a secondary outcome measure. We weren't expecting that. And that there was absolutely no difference in growth parameters between that group of babies and the group of babies receiving the lower protein intake. So this is the first time a randomized controlled trial of 2 different protein intakes has been, looking at body compositional outcomes, has been done. We didn't only look at growth, but we looked at lean body mass and adipose tissue mass using whole body MRI, and we found absolutely no difference between the groups at all. And we did find some suggestion that the higher protein intake might be harmful. So we are going to stay, I believed that we should be giving the standard intake immediately and not going up incrementally. I was absolutely wrong. We're now going to stay with going up incrementally, and we will be following these children up to see whether there's a difference in their neurodevelopmental outcomes. So that is the excitement of science. You do actually find things that you weren't expecting, and they turn your ideas upside down indeed. Karthik, please.
What was the reason for the increase in head size? I mean, who
Well,
expected?
it was completely unexpected. It was not a primary outcome measure, it was a secondary outcome measure, so I wouldn't want to place overemphasis on it. But there were 2 issues that led us to say, well, you know, one was the smaller head circumference in the babies receiving the higher protein intake, and the second thing was the higher blood urea levels, which suggested that the babies weren't actually able to metabolize the extra protein that they were being given. And there is another study in the literature, which is in fact a newborn piglet study, comparing total, not partial, but total parenteral nutrition with enteral nutrition in preterm piglets, also showing a decrease in brain growth in the babies fed total parenteral nutrition, and impaired neurodevelopmental outcomes in these baby piglets. So that's the only comparable study. So what I'm saying here is caution. Sorry, there's two hands going up there. Gentlemen here.
And did you cut down on the protein level once you saw the higher urea cut? The next.
This was a blind. Well, we didn't in the trial because it was a blinded trial. So nobody knew which group the babies were in.
So in the future you said you're going to change practice.
So what we're going to do now is stay with our incremental regimen of amino acids. So we will start at a lower dose of amino acids, go up in a stepwise manner, and not give them the immediate high dose of amino acids, which is what we had hoped to do.
So do you do 1.5, 2.5, 3.5?
Sorry?
You do 1.5, 2.5, 3.5?
It doesn't really, I think it doesn't really matter what you do. We actually started off at 2.7 grams, which, sorry, not 2.7, 2.2 grams, which is fine. There's no need to start too low. It's not too low, not too high, somewhere in the middle. But it does seem sensible to go up in an incremental manner.
Remember how to go in incremental manner? For example, on day 1, if you have started at 2.2 grams, then how to increase it?
Well, as I say, I think what our study has shown is that we would not want to go up above 3 grams of intravenous amino acids. So it depends upon where your starting point is. And of course, you will be not giving this in a blind manner. So now that you're forewarned about the high blood ureas, you can actually monitor the baby's tolerance on an individual level. So if you start at 2.5 or 2.7 or 2.9, whatever it is, it doesn't really matter, but watch the baby's blood urea levels and don't push your protein load if the urea levels are rising. That's really the practical point. Sorry.
With the two groups, the one group you started at 4 grams per kg and continued at
3.9, I think it was the exact figure. Anyway, something like
that. Was
that.
continued.
And that was continued.
In the second group you started 2.5.
We started lower. And then we went up.
3.
We went up over 3 days.
Up to 3.
Up to 3.
And that was the peak.
Yep.
What was the reason of increasing only 0.3 grams as compared to not starting at 3 grams?
Pragmatic. There's any number of combinations that we could have used. So absolutely pragmatic. The key question we were asking was, if we give 2 different amounts of amino acids, and that was really the purpose of the randomization. The pragmatic element was how we reached that. We wanted to give 2 different amounts of amino acids, a lower one and a higher one. Would there be a difference in the baby's body composition? And that was a clear answer: no, no difference at all.
So this is completely in contradiction to the old belief of the law.
This is completely in contradiction, absolutely right, and that's why I said this is why science is so exciting. Completely in contradiction.
So what's the problem with the lipids though?
Now the lipids is another issue. So this was a factorial trial that we carried out. So it was a 2-by-2 randomization. The babies were randomized either to low amino acids, high amino acids, or to phospholipid or intralipid. So what lipid source do you use here? Both are available. Okay, so as with us, there's been a debate about whether or not we should be moving to phospholipid. The manufacturers of phospholipid have been saying, this is liver protective. Our gastroenterology colleagues have had very positive results in their patients, I have to say, not on the basis of randomized trials, but on the basis of, shall we call it anecdotal experience. So we put this to a randomized test. Once again, this is a blinded study, and our outcome measure was the degree of intrahepatocellular lipid accumulation at term, measured by magnetic resonance spectroscopy, in vivo magnetic resonance spectroscopy. Now we know from our previous research that preterm babies at term have got a really quite high amount of intrahepatocellular lipid, much higher than term babies, and in some of them it really approaches the kind of levels that in you or I would be considered fatty liver. So really quite high levels, and we don't know the biological implication of this, but our trial was powered on the basis of detecting a difference in intrahepatocellular lipid accumulation, and we hypothesized that the babies who received phospholipid would have a lower accumulation of IHCL. No, not the case, not the case. So no difference in liver function tests, no difference in conjugated bilirubin between the two groups. So no evidence to support the statement that SMOF is protective towards preterm babies receiving intravenous lipids. Once again, the manufacturer is going to hate us, but we cannot recommend routine use of SMOF in preterm parenteral nutrition. So, any other comments about lipids and amino acids? I would just emphasize, I think, be cautious about pushing high amino acid intakes, and don't feel that you have to go for an expensive lipid formulation, but also ask the question, do you actually need to give intravenous lipid if you're giving babies a lot of breast milk?
Now, one more question. What is your total calorie target when you're using this?
That's a very, very good question indeed. So what we do, in fact, let me just move on to the next slide, and please tell me if I'm running over time. So we go up to, we've done a national survey of how much breast milk, what the maximum amount of breast milk is used in the whole of the country. And I'm going to show you some of that data tomorrow, but very briefly I'll tell you that in the UK we know from a national survey, so this is not anecdote, this is real evidence. We know that the median volume in preterm babies, less than 32 weeks gestation, those babies who are getting maternal breast milk is 200 mils per kilo per day. That's the median. So lots of people go up above that, some below, and the range is roughly around about 180 to 220 mils per kilo, which is quite different from what you will see in many parts of the world. My American colleagues tell me, whoa, we will never go up to 200 mils per kilo, and I say, why not? And they say, well, we don't know, we don't. So certainly UK practice is a median of 200 mils per kilo, and that is extremely well tolerated indeed. Can I ask what you do here? And up to 200. Any higher? I mean, I think once again the point is here, if the baby is tolerating it, then there's no reason to not go up higher if you feel that the situation warrants it. So I wouldn't be scared of going up on higher volumes if the baby is doing well. There's nothing to suggest that you shouldn't be going up.
If I remember rightly, I think there's a paper from CMC Vellore which talks about 300 or 350 also, where you're allowing the baby to drink ad lib.
Now that's a very interesting point, because yes, there is some very interesting data actually. I don't know about the CMC Vellore data, but there's certainly other data showing that if you measure the amount of milk ingested by a freely suckling baby, but these were more mature babies, a freely suckling baby, then some of them will ingest volumes of as high as 300, 350. So we meddle too much in neonatal intensive care. We love numbers, and we say, okay, 180, 150, 200, whatever it is, and stop there. But I think there's absolutely no reason for this. So another key point here is to transition to suck feeds as soon as possible. And I absolutely deplore the custom which is creeping into practice in the UK. Certainly, again, my American colleagues tell me it's rife in the United States. I don't know what it's like here, but that is that even when you have a baby who's able to suck up the breast, the mother is pumping and putting it in a bottle and giving the bottle to the baby, which seems ludicrous to me, particularly given what we've just said about regulating their own intake. So that's why you'll see here this bullet point: transition to suck feeds at the breast as soon as possible. So,
sorry, does antenatal Doppler have any influence on increment of?
Now that's a very, very good question indeed. So the baby who is at risk of necrotizing enterocolitis, the growth-restricted baby, the baby with abnormal antenatal Dopplers, should you feed this baby in any way that's different? Well, we do have good data here. So, medicine does advance, and we do have good evidence. The ADEPT trial, which was specifically targeting babies with growth-restricted babies with abnormal antenatal Dopplers, showed quite clearly that you really do not need to withhold feeds from these babies, but you should. There's every reason to put them on the same enteral nutritional protocol, but then obviously titrate it according to the way in which the baby is tolerating this. So don't delay is the message in any group of babies.
When it comes to incremental feeds, the baby is on umbilical lines and on a couple of final ropes. Is there any caution that you need to take while doing incremental feeds?
Definitely introduce maternal milk as soon as possible.
No, yeah,
Yes.
milk, yeah. But how much quantity will you increment feeds when you have umbilical lines and final ropes?
The same. Well, once again, there is a very large trial. Again, tomorrow I'm going to give you some data from a trial that we carried out in South Africa in a resource-poor setting. But I'll just say also that there is a very large trial which is shortly to complete in the UK called the SIFT trial, which is comparing incremental volumes of 18 or 30 mils per kilo to see whether or not there is a difference. At the moment, a reasonable approach, which is the approach that we've adopted for a number of years, is to increase in increments of 15 mils per kilo per day. But watch this space because there will be much better trial evidence emerging shortly.
Nina, we don't have much experience on donor breast milk banking. I mean, do you have a donor breast milk?
Well, this is another area of controversy, and I'll say a few words about this and then I'll stop because I'm not going to talk about the other two cases because you've been a great group of people to discuss this with. But I would like to follow up with on Kartik's question about donor breast milk. Now, this is where emotion is taking hold, I think, over evidence. There is very poor evidence for. There's a lot of hope about the usefulness of donor breast milk in neonatal units. We use donor breast milk to a very limited extent. We have a donor breast milk in one of our neighbouring hospitals, but it supplies all of its related hospitals. But there is no good evidence for adopting donor breast milk as a standard of care in neonatal units. And if you look at the evidence, once again, I will show this to you tomorrow, it is extremely limited indeed. Now, on a theoretical basis, there's also concern about the indiscriminate burgeoning of donor breast milk on a number of different grounds. One is that you have to pasteurize it. And a pasteurized product is going to reduce many of the immunologically active factors. It won't eliminate them, so there may be still some benefit, but it will certainly reduce it. So we don't know the extent to which it is. It's certainly not going to be immunologically equivalent to fresh maternal milk. The second thing that pasteurization will do is it will destroy, obviously, the probiotic organisms, which are a key part of maternal milk. Running a breast milk bank is extremely expensive if you're going to do it properly. If donor breast milk is efficacious, then every baby should have access to it. But if it's not efficacious, then we should really be directing our efforts elsewhere and not wasting time, money and effort on it. And the fifth reason is that we've certainly got data from a large population survey carried out in the UK, which shows that those neonatal units who tend to use more donor breast milk are also the units who tend to end up using, in the preliminary stages at least, in the early days, tend to use less maternal milk. Now this is a really important issue because if mothers are led to believe that donor breast milk is as good as their own milk, they may not, and the same goes for staff too, all of us collectively may not put as much effort that we need to put into obtaining colostrum and maternal milk. So for a number of reasons, I'm afraid the jury is again still out about donor breast milk banks. You will see a lot of enthusiasm for them around the world. It may be that they're proven to be useful, but they have not been proven to be efficacious yet. Should I stop or?
Just a couple of questions.
Okay.
Probably a very simplistic doubt here. Is it the actual quantity of amino acids only, or do you think there could be a confounding factor in the relative amount of carbohydrate and the fatty acid?
Absolutely spot on.
At the same point.
Absolutely spot on. So what we've concluded is exactly that. That the next question that needs to be asked is if you give a higher amount of amino acids, but with a higher amount of non-protein energy, will you actually promote the utilization of protein to a better extent? So that's the mechanistic question that needs to be addressed. But the efficacy question that needs to be addressed is, does this equate to a better functional outcome for the baby? So there are two important questions. I mean, the other interesting thing about science is that there's no shortage of things to do. So with each study that you do, it opens up the next series of questions. So this is an extremely important one.
I understand that there are some milk banks in Europe which do not pasteurize and just use frozen milk to preserve the benefits.
That's right. That's right. So there are some Scandinavian breast milk banks now which are using, which have based their practice around very careful screening and the use of indeed not necessarily frozen either, but also fresh donor milk. Now, my teachers at this point tell me, gosh, you know, things go around in circles. We're back to the days of wet nursing. And those of you who have been monitoring the internet will see that there is a flourishing market in the sale of unregulated donor breast milk through the internet. I don't know whether this is happening in India. It's certainly happening in other parts of the world. Completely unregulated. And I think as a clinical and scientific community, we should be putting the best interests of our babies first and saying we need to ensure that what we're advocating is safe and what's available is safe. And not only that it's safe, but also that it's effective and efficacious in our babies. So and this is why I deliberately used the phrase, let's avoid the triumph of emotion over evidence when it comes to donor breast milk. But I'm very well aware that I will be standing up on many platforms around the world and be shot down for saying that. But nonetheless, I'm still going to say it.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Ravi, Praveen and others for giving me an opportunity to give a talk on preterm nutrition, special reference to a case presentation. Many points have already been alluded to by Dr. Neena Modi, and I feel that she has already summarized what I was supposed to say. It's like the current generation of doctors following the misprinciple of management, investigations, signs and symptoms. It should be the other way around. I think she's already done the job. But maybe in about 20 or 30 minutes, whatever maybe she has left out, I would like to cover. I'll start with a case presentation, how we manage the baby in our neonatal intensive care unit. This is a real case. In fact, this baby was discharged yesterday. This was a 26 weeks preterm, extremely overweight baby weighing 860 grams, born by a mother who was a preemie. She had pregnancy-induced hypertension. She was also having gestational diabetes mellitus. She didn't require any treatment for her diabetes. Otherwise, she was okay. The baby was born by a cesarean section. The baby was intubated in view of poor respiratory efforts and shifted to the neonatal intensive care unit. X-ray chest showed evidence of RDS, and baby received 1 dose of surfactant. Umbilical lines were inserted. Baby was ventilated in the SIMU mode with pressures of 16/5, rate of 30 and pleural of 30%. We do the cranial ultrasound, 2D echocardiography and abdominal ultrasound, superior mesenteric artery Doppler on day 1 in all babies who are less than 32 weeks, less than 1500 grams. This baby showed increased resistance in the superior mesenteric artery. Started a baby in antibiotics, prophylactic fluconazole, though the incidence of fungal infection in the unit is 0. We do start less than 32 weeks, less than 1500 grams prophylactic fluconazole. Baby was commenced on vitamin A and caffeine. That is our policy. We start on day 1. Now regarding nutrition, what should be the approach in this baby? Many centers may not have access for parental nutrition. They may start 10% dextrose on day 1 and then start the baby on feeds on day 1 or day 2. Do you start the baby on TPN and lipids, or do you give TPN alone without lipids? Many centers give TPN without lipids. Some centers do give TPN with lipids. What about feeding? You used to feed the baby on day 1. So the key issues to be addressed when it comes to preterm nutrition is what is the best feed for a preterm baby? Obviously, the answer will be breast milk. What will be the timing and schedule of feeding? It depends again on the gestation and weight of the baby. Minimal enteral nutrition, more than 34 weeks you put the baby to breast, baby can easily take sucking feeds. All this may not be necessary. And then total parental nutrition or parental nutrition, role of micronutrients, role of LC, PUFA, arachidonic acid, DHA, when do you start vitamins, mineral, iron, is there a need for probiotics or prebiotics? And there are certain special situations wherein it's a growth restricted baby or baby with chronic lung disease. Colostrum is started as early as possible, and in all babies who are ventilated, you smear the oral oropharyngeal area with a few drops of colostrum to prevent ventilation associated pneumonia. And feeds are commenced in terms of 20 mils per kilo increments from day 3 or day 4 onwards. And the type of milk, definitely, obviously breast milk is preferable, but many a times breast milk quantity may not be sufficient. You may have to use preterm formula. Lots of questions are raised about parental nutrition. How early do you start amino acids? And many studies have shown amino acids are beneficial if you start from day 1 itself. When do you start lipids? You can start from day 1. Is there a need to monitor triglycerides? Triglycerides are monitored as a routine on every 3rd day in babies who receive lipids, but we don't do it anymore. Can you give parental nutrition through umbilical venous line or peripheral lines? The answer is yes. You continue lipids during sepsis? Yes, you can give in terms of pneumonia or sepsis. There was a concern regarding the lipids being imbibed by the macrophages, resulting in increased ventilation requirements. It's not really the case. Definitely, you can give lipids even in the presence of pneumonia or sepsis. Many elegant studies have shown, studies by Poindexter, Bill Hay, Erin Kranz have shown a significant improvement in terms of head circumference, better nitrogen balance, and amino acids are started on day 1 itself, and they are safe. And Stevens' study is quite interesting. In 2009, he included about 114 ELBW neonates. With every increase in the calorie content, there was a definite increase in the MDI, and then with each gram per kilo of protein intake, there was an increase in the MDI. When you don't give amino acids on day 1, it can lead to metabolic emergency. Metabolic shock can occur. There will be a starvation response. Endogenous glucose production occurs. Low insulin, and this may lead to hyperglycemia and non-olivuric hyperkalemia if you don't give amino acids on day 1 itself. Lipids have to be given on day 1 itself, because as early as day 5, a neonate can develop essential fatty acid deficiency. It's better to start lipids early, and essential fatty acids have a definite impact on the brain and the retinal development. We start with 1 gram per kilo on day 1 and start for 2, and then subsequently 3 grams per kilo, and we don't monitor triglycerides anymore. There are many situations wherein lipids are not given. They say that as a tradition we give only amino acids. People are really worried about infection. If you take all separate precautions, and we have a separate lipid line wherein only lipids are given all through, and then this line is not touched to give antibiotics or any other medications. We have brought down the incidence of fungal infection to almost 0. People are worried about pulmonary hypertension and lung disease, whether we can give, I alluded to earlier, we can definitely give lipids even in presence of pneumonia. The problem is with extremely low birth weight babies who are really malnourished, and these are the babies who end up in the extrauterine growth restriction. A baby who is a 32-week or 1.8 kilo baby will usually not end up with postnatal growth failure. Baby who stays in the unit for a long time, baby less than a kilo, who is chronically ventilated, has BPD. These are all the babies who end up in postnatal growth failure. All of you are aware of the advantages of early enteral nutrition. I will not elaborate on this. We did a study involving babies who are less than 32 weeks, less than 1500 grams. We found out the increase in insulin resistance was associated with increased incidence of necrotizing enterocolitis. Some of them ended up in feed intolerance. But babies who had a normal resistance, normal flow pattern, none of them ended up in EC, or babies did not have feed intolerance. These are all the relative so-called contraindications for feeding. A baby who is in shock who is on several inotropes, I think maybe you will have to be a bit cautious. Instead of advancing feeds too rapidly, you might have to step up slowly, probably you may prevent NEC. All of us are preoccupied with the diagnosis of necrotizing enterocolitis. Any baby who has feed intolerance, we always assume that this could be a case of necrotizing enterocolitis. If you take the overall picture, the incidence may range anywhere from 3 to 10%. But many a times feed intolerance is a common issue, and bilious aspirates may not mean the baby has a pathological bowel anatomical obstruction or NEC. Retrograde flow can give rise to bilious aspirates. Let the first feed be breast milk, as Dr. Neena Modi rightly pointed out. Colostrum, even few drops of colostrum as early as half an hour to 1 hour makes a lot of difference. The intestinal colonization depends on various factors. Age of the baby. When the baby stays in the intensive care unit for a long time, the colonization pattern is entirely different compared to a full-term baby, wherein there will be a lot of bifidobacteria and lactobacilli. Type of delivery which is alluded to. Vaginal delivery makes a lot of difference compared to cesarean sections, maternal flora, the environment wherein the baby lives, and use of antibiotics. Antibiotics given unnecessarily for a period of a week can give rise to NEC. One of the studies showed increased incidence of necrotizing enterocolitis in babies who received antibiotics for 7 days. Meaning there was alteration in the gut flora, and that was the reason why these babies ended up in necrotizing enterocolitis. So breastfed babies, the flora is a bit different compared to the formula-fed babies. You can make out the bifidobacteria and lactobacilli, the colonies increase substantially earlier on compared to babies who are formula-fed. And if baby stays in the ICU for a long time, more of enterococci get colonized in the gut, and that may be the forerunner of some sort of an infection. One of the famous Chinese saints said, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. So for 1,000 miles, if somebody has to walk, first step is very important. Let the first feed be breast milk rather than formula. Day 3, this baby developed a hemodynamically significant PDA. We do echoes regularly. Can you continue feeds when there is a significant PDA? That's a question. We are all worried about the Steele phenomenon, backflow of the retrograde flow and then the intestinal ischemia. You can definitely feed. We don't withhold feeds. We can feed. The only thing is you have to be a bit cautious. Watch for NEC, and then step up feeds slowly. Probably that will be the answer. Can you give feeds when the baby is on ibuprofen or indomethacin? The answer is yes, definitely you can give. There is a bit of a difference in terms of mesenteric blood flow. When you give indomethacin, there can be a reduction compared to ibuprofen, where there may not be any reduction. You can definitely feed baby when the baby is on indomethacin. Day 5, baby had increasing ventilator requirements. X-ray chest showed evidence of pneumonia. Septic was positive. Antibiotics were changed. And what should be the feeding TPN approach? I don't think that there should be any difference in terms of feeding TPN or enteral feeding. Now, when it comes to enteral feeding, several questions will have to be addressed. How early do you start enteral feeding? As early as possible. Minimal enteral nutrition on day 1 itself, and then maybe on day 3, day 4, you can step up feeds in terms of 20 ml per kilo. What we do is 20 ml per kilo we step up on a daily basis till the baby reaches about 150 ml per kilo. This is the increment. What about the daily volume increase? Is it related to necrotizing enterocolitis? Continuous feeding versus bolus feeding. Bolus feeding is definitely physiological, but hormones are liberated. Continuous feeding will not mimic the normal physiology. And certain special situations like BBD, there may be, you may have to reduce the volume of feed, and you may have to increase the calorie density. We are aware that human breast milk is predominantly the main source of early feeding in low birth weight infants, and we are all aware of the advantages of human breast milk. In one study wherein Suman alluded to in her talk, when the total volume of feed, when the 50% of it was more, 50% of it was more in terms of breast milk, the incidence of necrotizing enterocolitis was definitely less. 5 out of 156 babies compared to babies wherein the volume of milk total 50% of it and below was breast milk. So there was a definite reduction in necrotizing enterocolitis. The problem with human milk is unfortified human milk in preterm babies makes a difference. Preterm babies require more protein, more calcium, more phosphorus. whereas this term human milk or preterm human milk will not meet the requirements. Poor rates of growth have been documented, nutritional deficits during and beyond hospitalization. Protein and fat content vary. 25-30 years ago, one of my professors said, whether the mother is from the rural area or urban area, the volume, the quality of the milk is the same. It is not so. Hour to hour there may be variation. The morning and evening milk expression may vary. The content of DHA or arachidonic acid levels also may vary depending on where the mother comes from. Coastal area with lot of seafood eating community, automatically the DHA level go up compared to mothers who are vegetarians. Calcium and phosphorus level will be low. The requirement is more in a preterm baby. Basically, we target the protein. We require more proteins and then additionally calories and then calcium, phosphorus. This is what the human milk fortifiers provide when you add on to breast milk. So what do we have? We have the conventional bovine human milk fortifiers with a range of 1 to 1.6 grams of protein per 100 ml. And human milk based fortifiers, which are very, very expensive, Prolacta, available in the US market. Liquid protein fortifiers are available. High calorie formula is also available. Now the thing is, unfortunately, in this part of the country, we have only one human milk fortifier, which doesn't really meet the requirements. In Delhi, 2 products are available. We are yet to get good human milk fortifiers from good standard companies. There's another thing, this human milk fortifier, if you start using it, will be a sort of a standard. Only one formula, one fortifier is available, which will meet the requirements of all preterm babies, whether it is a 26-weeker or a 28-weeker or a 32-weeker. There is what is known as lacto engineering. Within the unit, you can analyze the components, fat content, protein content, everything, using the infrared spectroscopy. It's available in one center in Calcutta. It costs about $40,000. I saw in the SPGAN meeting recently. It costs about 14,000 euros. It is available in India. So you can tailor the needs of the preterm baby by monitoring the various components using this lacto engineering technique. Day 10, this baby was extubated to CPAP. Abdominal distension was noticed, the classical CPAP belly. You can feed the baby even though there is a CPAP belly. There were gastric residuals. Should we give feeds? Again, it depends on the volume of gastric residuals. If there is an increasing gastric residual with abdominal distension, with clinical signs of sepsis or desaturations, tachycardia, bradycardia, probably you may think in terms of necrotizing enterocolitis. When there is a feed intolerance or this so-called stage 1 NEC is a very, very gray area. Stage 2, stage 3, people can easily make out. Stage 1 is an issue. Can you feed babies when there is recurrent apnea and bradycardia or desaturations? You can continue feeds as long as the baby is tolerating feeds. Hemoglobin was 9 grams on day 15, and baby is also having apnea and bradycardia. We thought of giving fat cells. And there's a concern regarding whether you should feed the baby whenever the baby is getting a blood transfusion. There are 2 things. One is there is supposed to be some degree of mesenteric ischemia whenever the blood transfusion is on. And second important thing is the mechanism put forward for mesenteric ischemia is the fetal RBCs are pliable, whereas the adult RBCs are not pliable. They get locked up in the capillaries, block the capillaries. There can be a capillary rupture, there can be ischemia. This is the theory put forward by Bob Christensen from Utah. This is another mechanism put forward for intravesical hemorrhage. When you transfuse babies, there is a risk of intravesical hemorrhage. Again, it is related to the adult RBCs, which clog the capillaries, ischemia, capillary rupture, and intravesical hemorrhage. We do feed babies when babies are on transfusion or when the transfusion is on. We continue TPN till 120 ml per kilo and then stop TPN and continue with feeding. And human milk fortifier is commenced when the baby reaches full feeds, 150 ml per kilo. Some authors do recommend 100 ml per kilo when the baby reaches HMF can be added. When there is a gastric residual, should you discard it or introduce it again? That's a question. It depends again on the volume of feeding, nature of feeding. Say for example, if it is a coffee ground aspirate or a bilious aspirate, you may discard. Or if it is just a partially digested milk, it's better not to discard, insert it and give whatever is remaining. I told you bilious aspirates may not always mean the baby has got an anatomical obstruction or necrotizing enterocolitis. Gut motility is very slow. the gut motility is not optimal in preterm babies. That's the reason why a baby who is a 26-weeker may pass meconium on day 7, which is completely normal, abnormal in a term baby. Other important thing is there will be retrograde flow that can give rise to bilious aspirates. Probiotics are being tried in many centers. We do use domperidone. Of course, domperidone can give rise to cardiac toxicity. The rhythm disturbance is known to occur. That's one of the things which has been described. Domperidone is used once in a while as a prokaryotic drug. Erythromycin, the strong proponent of erythromycin is PC Ng from University of Hong Kong, who recommends a very high dose, and as per his study, erythromycin is a very effective prokinetic. We don't use erythromycin often in our unit. Cochrane review regarding the continuous and bolus feeding. I told you bolus feeding is optimal in terms of mimicking the normal physiology. And a lot of times feeds are not given because the Apgar score was very low. Baby was severely asphyxiated. Baby has umbilical catheters in place. Baby is having apnea bradycardia. Baby is ventilated. Baby is on CPAP. Lots of excuses are given. I think these have taken the back seat now. Definitely you can feed the baby in presence of all these situations. When you give TPN alone and when you don't feed the baby, lots of things happen. There can be increased adhesion molecules, decreased IgA, systemic inflammatory response syndrome can occur, lack of trophic hormones. All these things can happen if you give only TPN and if you don't feed the baby. Gut has to be, something has to be given, some sort of either colostrum or formula. It has to be given as early as possible. Dr. Ramji is here. Ramji and Ambalavan did a study involving the increments of the formula. I feel the number of cases in this group was small, and then larger studies are required to say whether this 30 ml per kilo increment is beneficial or 35 per kilo is beneficial. We start with 20 ml per kilo on day 1, step up to 40, 60, 80 likewise, and we have by this standardized feeding regimen we have brought down the incidence of necrotizing enterocolitis. Standardized feeding regimens definitely help, may provide the single most important global tool to prevent or minimize NEC in preterm neonates. And meta-analysis of 5 studies definitely showed the significant the benefit of the standardized feeding regimen. All these have to be taken into consideration when you think of standardized feeding regimen. What do you give on day 1, GI priming, initiation of feeding, what is the feeding method? There has to be a standard protocol. Each and every consultant coming in and altering the feeding pattern, that will make a lot of difference. So standardized feeding regimen can definitely bring down the incidence of necrotizing enterocolitis. 4 weeks the baby was oxygen dependent on CPAP. 2D echo showed evidence of pulmonary hypertension. The baby was commenced on sildenafil, and we also started nebulized budesonide. With BPD, what should be the feeding approach? Fluid restriction is one of the important things in the BPD. Diuretics we don't use anymore, dexamethasone we don't use anymore. So volume of feed you cannot increase, that may worsen the oxygen requirement, that may worsen the lung function. So with 150 ml per kilo of fluids or maybe less than that, you can increase the caloric density, or you can, anyhow you are adding human milk fortifier, that may serve the purpose. And then the sucking, and we don't give bottle feed babies, we give Balada feeds, and then baby started gaining weight and baby was discharged. Probiotics, there was quite a bit of talk on probiotics by Dr. Neena Modi. I will not elaborate on this. Only when the Cochrane database says more than 1500 grams, there was a significant benefit in terms of length of stay, reduction in the necrotizing enterocolitis, but this has not been documented below 1000 grams. 1000 grams and below is the area where is the group wherein you get more number of cases of necrotizing enterocolitis. Studies have shown reduction in NEC or reduction in late onset sepsis in the units wherein the NEC incidence itself was very high in the beginning. They could bring it down to some extent. You are aware of the mechanisms of action of these probiotics. They have effect on the epithelium, they have effect on the mucosal immunity, and effect on the other bacteria. Various organisms have been tried in various trials. In fact, Dr. Deshpande and Patola went to the extent of saying the dramatic effect sizes, tight confidence intervals, extremely low p-values, and overall evidence indicate that additional placebo-controlled trials are unnecessary if a suitable probiotic product is available. So in their group, they could reduce the number of cases of NEC and then all-cause mortality. Pro-prem trial was from Australia and New Zealand. Again, this did not show much of, there was some reduction in the incidence of NEC, but all-cause mortality, there was no effect. And Dr. Neena Modi alluded to this PIPS trial. Largest number of cases included in the trial, Bifidobacterium breve was the only probiotic which was used, and they did not find any difference in the incidence of necrotizing enterocolitis. This is the one I mentioned, Cochrane database, showing significant effect in babies more than 1500 grams, but not that much in babies who are less than 1000 grams. Again, about the probiotics, what to give, and then how to give, how to start, and then how long do you give the data. So the most effective probiotic or the combination that is not known. And there is always a risk of probiotic-induced sepsis. 2-3 cases have been reported in Italy, but this requires a special culture medium. Many people have been using probiotics, but we do not know whether some of them have ended up in probiotic-induced sepsis, probiotic sepsis. I have another case, 35 weeks preterm baby, 14-20 grams severe IUGR. Mother had PAH, absent and diastolic flow in the umbilical artery, and baby had chemo 12 with good occurs. Had transient ecapnia of G1 for 12 hours, maybe came out of oxygen after 12 hours, and SMA Doppler velocimetry showed increased resistance in the superior mesenteric artery. Do you feed this baby? Again, you can give trophic feeds followed by regular feeds, predominantly breast milk. ADAPT study was mentioned by Neena Modi, and then we did this study involving 32 weeks less than 1500 grams. And then in our study, whoever had the normal SMA flow, there was no NEC. Now, coming to the last part of the presentation, was growth optimal in this baby? You are aware of the Ehrenkrantz EUGR, postnatal growth charts. These are some of our babies who did gain weight, but none of them crossed the 10th centile in terms of weight, length, or head circumference. So postnatal growth failure is very common. Should we chase these figures of the baby crossing the 10th centile, or if as long as the baby is growing, should you be okay with that? That's the question. This baby was discharged after 8 weeks of NICU stay. Weight was 1860 grams, length was 41.5 centimeters, head circumference 29.2 centimeters, all below the 10th centile, but clinically baby was normal. Of course, baby requires long-term follow-up. Nutrition at discharge, we don't have post-discharge nutrition. What we have to do is we have to give breast milk, human milk fortifier, and then we have preterm formula. The question is for how long? Should we again chase to 10th centile, or if the baby is 2.5 kilos, stop at that point of time? It is not very certain. So what is the optimal growth rate for the preterm infant? We really do not know what is the optimal growth rate. Some people say it is 20 grams per kilo per day, that is supposed to be optimal. But you have to strike a balance between undernutrition and overnutrition. Rapid growth can give rise to metabolic syndromes. Better nutrition, meaning overnutrition, can give rise to insulin resistance, coronary artery disease, blood pressure, and other things. We don't need a baby to become a sumo. The lifespan is definitely compromised because of overeating. And we don't want a baby who was on the left hand side, IUGR baby going on to a stage of weighing over 4 or 5 kilo plus. You find out what the baby is receiving and carefully monitor the weight gain and velocity and linear growth. Make sure mother brings in all the milk, not some of it, and caloric density can be increased or liberalized volume. We can add HMF, and donor milk is not all that useful. So there's a lack of uniformity in practice, very low birth weight infants from time to time, NIC to NICU, within the NICU region to region. There's variability in practice in terms of when you start feeding, how you give trophic feeding, for how long you give. The ideal rate of advancement is really not clear. And what is the safe limit? Nobody really knows. Some people say 180 per kilo, some people say 240, 300, nobody really knows. Large trials are really required. So you start early enteral nutrition, trophic feeds, encourage breast milk, which is the gold standard, follow protocols while advancing feeds, start parenteral nutrition at day 1, add on HMF. Civil MCT oil we don't use because of the calorie build-up, calorie density. It is said that Bill Hay said that hours, not days, are the longest periods infants should be allowed not to receive nutrition after birth, intravenously or enterally, meaning start parental nutrition at day 1 and feed as early as possible. In 1930, Williams Marriott said, there is perhaps no field in medical practice in which more difference of opinion existed than in that of infant feeding. We are in 2015, we don't have a consensus in neonatal medicine on enteral feeding practices. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have the lectures. Any more questions or comments? And you had some question to Professor Kumar.
Hariram sir has already and then go. According to you, what should be the consensus to start on lipids? What sir told is increase the 2 and then go. So is it we have to do the same thing?
I think that Dr. Hariram's already covered this. I mean, I think that what's been discussed is a perfectly reasonable approach for lipids. I say the real question though is that if you are starting a baby on enteral feeding regimen, should we be using lipids at all? That I think is the crucial question for us to be answering as a neonatal community.
But as well to see whether that has an effect on the bad outcome for feeders.
Basically resistive index. We didn't do the PDA study. PDA echo was done, but not at the same time. We didn't do that.
Square one and then start up.
So I presume whether it's a confirmed NEC means I think depends on the stage.
Stage 2. Stage 2 and stage 2 or stage 3. For stage 3 the situation is different. Stage 2.
Yeah, so it depends on that, and if it's very severe, then you'll have to go again very slowly. I mean, that's again a big debate, what is right and probably have anything to say on
Yes, but definitely had an NEC. Okay, I'm not going to use any stages, but if you think the baby definitely had an NEC, then our classic treatment is, of course, a period of withholding of enteral feeds. But you need to think about the converse, which is withholding enteral feeds for too long actually is going to compromise intestinal integrity. We've just shown in a national surveillance study that in fact 10% of babies who develop NEC that leads to death or surgery, 10% of those babies never had any enteral feeds whatsoever. So there's a danger of overdoing the period of non-feeding. After surgery, what we do is start feeds when there is no longer evidence of peritonitis. So when the baby is no longer tender, when the ileus is resolved, and when the aspirates are no longer dark green bowels, and the baby has moved their bowels. So once there's evidence that the ileus is resolved and the inflammation has settled, then we'll start feeds.
How fast do you go?
How fast you go up? We'll start at the standard protocol that I mentioned to you before, 15 mils per kilo per day, and then up incrementally. But I think that there is a danger. The point I want to emphasize is that I think there's a danger of
study. In preterm babies, there was a difference in terms of MDA and PDA related data. And then males were benefited more than both of the girls. That was one thing. And then second thing is 600 milligrams of DHA given to the mothers in the antenatal period. That really benefited the preterm babies more than the term babies. DHA is being used now to prevent BPD, NEC, the neonatal babies.
Sorry, is this beyond the breast milk?
Yeah.
So we need it. We need it as a question. Okay, so last question.
So regarding the calorie requirement in extremely low birth weight babies, we usually start with 80 ml per kg. Is to prevent the protein catabolism, we start TPN per se. Even then, we won't be meeting the calorie requirement up to 1 week based on the PDA, the fluid rest requirement. How should we go about in such cases? Because there is, as ma'am said, there is no consensus among the about the caloric requirement postnatal to prevent postnatal growth retardation. How should we go about it?
the baby is a total energy intake of around about 120 kilocalories per kilo per day, give or take, very roughly. But the point that I want to make is that if you start with even partial parenteral nutrition on day 1 and some enteral feed, you will be delivering you can deliver 120 kilocalories per kilo per day from within the first 48 hours easily. So there really is no reason for postnatal postnatal growth restriction. There's no reason to allow a baby, there's no reason for a baby to lose weight, and this is really the critical thing. Start milk feeds and start some parenteral nutrition
with the fluid
immediately.
volume of 8 ml per kg, ma'am.
Sorry?
With the fluid volume of 8 ml per kg.
Well, don't be worried about the fluid volume. And once again, you know, there's absolutely no reason.
Being a preterm, extremely low birth weight, T1 to T3, risk of PDA, then
there is no reason to be frightened of a fluid volume. And once again, the evidence is quite clear here. There is no reason to be frightened of a starting fluid volume, intravenous fluid volume, of even 150 mils per kilo per day on day one.
How do you progress into your unit regarding extreme low birth weight on the fluid?
So it depends upon how concentrated your parenteral nutrition solution is. That's really the critical issue. If you have got central access and you can provide a concentrated solution, then you can deliver whatever parenteral nutrition requirement you wish in whatever volume you wish. So I would recommend don't equate a particular volume with a particular nutritional intake. Decide what nutritional intake you want to give, decide what volume you want to give, and then give that nutritional intake in that volume. And if you have a central line and you have the ability to make up a concentrated parenteral nutrition solution, then you're fine. If you don't have that ability, then you can deliver the full intravenous requirement through a peripheral line in 150 mils per kilo, no problem.